Good morning.
Is that Mary?
Yep.
Yes, Cynthia.
Hi, Mary. I'm just waiting a minute to make sure we have a quorum. Larry Bragman has just joined us, and Jack is just getting himself settled. So we're just going to take another minute until Jackie joins us.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Sure.
You're able to make both interviews. So you're going to make that, or that's good. I didn't know.
So,
if you did.
I think for some reason I have it for today and tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. Today is just one candidate who couldn't make tomorrow.
Okay.
I was like, there's no way.
All right, you're
we're
gonna
get
have
on their
to
schedule.
do something about my having to take vacation time when I
Yeah.
have just taken 2.5 week vacation. So.
Hopefully this will work out. Thanks.
I'm not sure, I have a webcast that I'm doing, so I'll have a hard stop, but we can talk about it after this meeting. Okay, we now have a quorum, so I'm gonna call the meeting of the special meeting of the Board of Directors to order. Our initial item is to adopt the agenda of the last meeting. Motion, and Larry's on the phone, so we will need a roll call vote.
So moved.
Director Bregman.
Aye.
Director Gibson. Aye. Director Colin.
Aye.
Director Russell.
Aye.
Thank you.
This is the moment for public comment. Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, we just adopted the agenda, and what I meant to do, though, I have a note that Mary has requested that we move item 3 to item 2. Is that the request
Yes.
specifically? So we don't have to redo the roll call vote, do we? Can we just agree to do that? Okay, great. So before we get to that, though, we have our public expression time. Is there anybody here who has a comment on an item that is not on the agenda? Larry, please join us.
Good morning, all. Larry Minicus. Because of a conflict with the MCL board meeting, I couldn't be here for your response to the grand jury report.
Excuse me 1 second. Either Mary or Larry, could you guys mute yourselves? You're rustling around and it's making it really hard for us to hear. Thank you.
Really.
And we need to hear everything that Larry has to say to us.
And I just want to say that I found the response defensive and underwhelming, and that really what the grand jury is asking of public agencies to say, look, we see what you're saying, and here's our need, and what you are not addressing in the grand jury report is the need of the districts, the things that need to still be done. And to just point out that we're doing 900, and I think it was 41 acres is what I counted in all. It comes down to around 4 or 5% of the total land mass, and all of this needs to be addressed. I think it's important to be forthcoming with the public and say, here's our shortcomings. We know this is a level 3 severe area. CAL FIRE has called the entire area severe, and I think all of these points need to be addressed. And it doesn't mean that you're doing anything wrong or right. It just means that for the benefit of the public, we need to say, look, yeah, we recognize there's a lot that needs to be done, and that's the point I'd like to make this
Great.
morning. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Do we have any other public expression on items that are not on the agenda?
Have we sent out the response yet?
We haven't. It's not due until the 18th. We asked the board for comments. I sent the attachment out in Word, so if any of the board members wanted to comment, I can resend it. Or
Can we do that?
yeah, yeah, we can resend.
Okay, so it's not a finished product.
Right.
Okay.
I'm aware of that. Thank you.
And different issue actually, but we're responding to Sonoma too.
Right, that's in August, so we'll bring back, and that's a bit easier. It's just a smaller issue.
Thanks a lot.
I think our approach on the Sonoma one was a number of the requests to us went out to all public agencies that have similar responsibilities in wildfires, and we can't speak for everyone, you know, a countywide assessment, that sort of stuff. So anyway, that was the direction of trying to speak for ourselves, but recognize it was a pretty big broad request from the grand jury.
Okay.
Okay, moving on to the regular calendar, our first item is to approve the minutes of the May 23rd special board meeting on finance. Do I have a motion?
Move approval.
Second.
Do we have any public comment on this item before the roll call vote? Okay,
Director Brandon.
Aye.
Director Gibson.
Aye.
Director Kohler.
aye.
Director Russell.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. And now we're going to move item 3, the capital maintenance fee payment plan for local governmental agencies, up to item 2, and that will precede our monthly update per request of our general counsel. Mary?
So this item is a proposal before the board to create board policy number 52. This policy proposes to allow public agencies such as schools, cities, and towns to be able to work with the district to defer CMF payments on a payment plan, including interest that will be owed to the district for up to a 2-year period, and then afterwards there's an amortization schedule that they will pay back the owed fees. Interest will accrue during both periods, and the idea is that since most of our agencies have 2-year budgeting, they might not be prepared for the impact, since some of them, one school system, it's $42,000 a year for their CMF charges.
So before we get into, I'm sorry, were there more details you wanted to add?
No, that's it.
So just to make sure that we have sort of clarity about how this all came about, a number of us have been chatting with particularly the school districts. And I wonder, Ben, if it would be useful if you, or Charlie, whoever's the appropriate person, to sort of just review how those conversations have gone, what those, the concerns that have been raised. I think the board has been very supportive of finding a workaround here. The idea obviously is to work with our sister agencies to make sure that we're meeting their needs. They are water consumers, but they are also, critical members of the, our public infrastructure here, and we want to be doing everything that we can as the water agency to support them in their mission. So I think it would be helpful, especially for, people who aren't familiar with those conversations, to just talk a little bit about the concerns that have been raised and how we have landed here as a means of addressing them.
So I think you characterize well the board direction and the intent of the board that staff heard in context of this rate increase, and specifically the CMF. And staff has had numerous discussions with Mary Jane Burke, and she's brought in the other superintendents from the schools as well to try and figure out how to make this work for them. And there's 2 pieces to it. One is the near-term costs, given the nature of their budget cycle that Charlie mentioned. And we've tried to address that in this item before you today. And the other is how else, that's not a money savings. What we had identified as we were looking at this, and we brought to the schools opportunities where they could save money. They could save water or money, and we're going to be working with them on a separate track under a water conservation effort to help them identify areas where they can reduce their consumption, and also where they can strategically reduce the size of their meters, which would be largely their irrigation meters, by putting on smart controllers and other reconfigurations that collectively may very well offset the CMF once all of these initiatives are in play.
Have we offered to provide them with AMI? I know we're doing that on an experimental, more like
Yes.
a pilot basis, but that's something that we can be doing for them.
I understand that most of their large irrigation meters are already on AMI. In
Okay.
fact, we've identified a number of leaks in the past. But part of this package water conservation effort is offering AMI for their non-irrigation meters to help with leak identification and better control of their water usage as well.
And what about plumbing of facilities and those type of things? Would that be included in the program?
Yeah, well, we're thinking going forward, and we're beginning to have the more detailed discussions with the district, that piloting this initiative at one district that has a number of schools with fields and complications. And from that pilot, better understanding the nature of going forward to all the schools, the work we would do, the support we would provide, the resources we could bring and the resources they could bring, and that would be detailed in a subsequent agreement. So going forward, staff is looking at a two-part approach, kind of a light agreement for the initial pilot, and then a more detailed agreement for hitting all the districts and all the schools in our service area.
Could I just suggest we include an inventory of their plumbing fixtures? I mean, I know there's been some effort to replace out some of the older fixtures in the schools, but I think that should be included.
Yeah, in the suite of activities is our kind of traditional water audits. And so we will be performing that at each and every school. Some we've already done, but included in that is looking at antiquated fixtures and opportunities for replacement.
Right, I know that we've done a lot with toilets and urinals in schools over the last decade.
Right.
We've talked a lot about that. I think we provide all of that, almost all of that cost-free, haven't we?
I don't know the detail to
Yeah,
that.
it's been-
If it was cost-free or they used our, incentives.
Yeah, right. Do we have an estimate of how much we are saving the districts from assuming that this board policy were to be adopted, do we have an estimate of what we're saving the districts? Because there was concern about, a concern that I very much share, about impact to the schools' budgets.
The annual CMF cost to all of the schools is about $180,000.
That's, okay, and has that been reduced will that be reduced as a result of our I'm trying to get a sense of what the impact is of our adopting this policy.
So this plan is strictly to provide them the opportunity to defer the first 2 years of CMF fees and over a subsequent 5-year payment plan. So there's not money savings per se in this plan.
I see.
The money savings would be a result of our work plan that we partner with them to help identify leaks, put in AMI meters, reduce some large meters they may have, a suite of opportunities.
That latter aspect we should do in any of them. We should already be doing that, of course. So I favor that, but refresh my memory here, the obstacle to simply exempting them from this is a statutory requirement of some sort. Am I right about that?
Yes, what we did look into that and determined that that was not, as I understand it, feasible under 218. So we came up with this alternative approach and had an agreement.
Right, and as I mentioned before, I've had a couple of informal conversations with the Office of our state legislators and got that they would be more than happy to cooperate with any implementation of any new laws that would overcome this. They're trying to get to the same place we are.
Interesting.
Does that make any sense to pursue that?
It does. If the board is inclined, that's certainly an initiative we could begin to look at with the school district.
Yeah, I would characterize the response I got as enthusiastic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So is it your sense, because I know you've talked with Mary Jane and others, is it your sense that this is a policy that they are comfortable with for the near term at least? Does this address the concerns that they've raised in a satisfactory way?
I think that's a fair characterization, yes. Of course, I don't think we have a single customer that would prefer simply not to pay a fee.
Right.
But I think she views this on behalf of the county and the school districts as a good partnering effort and a good effort by the district to work with them and try and make this work.
Right. Well, so my feeling about this is, I mean, and we've talked about this many times, so I'm just reiterating what I've said in the past, but, I am concerned about the hit, to the schools. Obviously, they are water consumers, and it's great that we're going to work with them to reduce their consumption and save them money, but I do feel that they are differently positioned than other water consumers, and so I'm delighted, Jack, to hear about the conversations that you've had. I don't know how easy it will be to amend 218. If this is fundamentally a 218 issue, that's, that obviously has very broad ramifications well beyond our district and our schools, but if there's a way to address it, I think we should be pursuing that. as I said earlier, I think, I think it's vital for us as a public agency to be doing everything we can to support our sister agencies in their missions, and so everything that we can be doing. Well, if this is it sounds like you feel that this is the best accommodation we can make right now for the school districts, given the constraints of Proposition 218.
Yes.
Okay. I think we may have had some, I'm sorry, is there any further board conversation on this item?
No.
Okay, I think we have some public comment on this item. Welcome.
Good morning, members of the board. My name is Kevin Haroff. I live at 40 La Cuesta in Greenbrae, and my customer number is 406009. And I'd like to comment on this matter. In particular, what I'd like to do is, I hope you all have received a copy of a June 26th letter from Walter McNeil that should have been distributed to you. And I just want to appear this morning primarily to endorse the substance of the letter that was provided to you by Mr. McNeil, and reiterate a couple of the things in particular that he stated in his letter regarding policy number 52. Policy number 52 should have been part of the original proposal put before the property owner fee payers in general about a month or so ago. Fee payers throughout the district who previously had the choice to consider whether they would protest the fees under Prop 218, and I was one of the residents who did file a protest, might have looked at these fees differently had they known or expected that public agencies would get special treatment in the form of fee deferrals and payment plans. Passing a policy after the fact that wasn't before those who had an opportunity to submit protests, as I did at the time, modifies and deprives fee payers of their rights under Proposition 218. In addition, policy number 52 will create non-uniform discriminatory rates where public agencies are given fee deferrals, payment plans, and interest rates for late payment that are below private market rates. Water districts have a legal obligation to provide uniform, non-discriminatory water rates for the same service given to its broad base of customers, whether public agencies or private parties, and I think that's an important point to consider. Whether you agree on the merits of providing special breaks to public entities, and I do represent a public entity as a member of the Lawrenceburg City Council, there's no basis here for making a discriminatory decision that benefits one set of customers over another. So I would urge you all to take those factors into account in your consideration of this policy today.
Thank you. Do we have any other public comment on this item?
I remember, because I actually wasn't planning to until I saw the letter this morning, but this is benefiting society, and I don't see where not doing this is benefit to anyone. And if it had been there prior to, if you had announced this prior to the vote on 218, I don't think it would have made any difference to the consumer. In fact, you might have even gotten more support if you're showing that you're supporting the school districts in this way. And I would encourage you to try what Jack started there and work with the legislature to get this changed, because obviously it's something that should be changed for all the right reasons. Thank you.
Larry, do we have any other comments on this item? Okay, that being the case, let me bring this back to the board, and I just want to make sure procedurally I'm doing this the right way. The action item here is it to approve this policy per se, or is it to move it to the full board for approval? I mean, this is a full board meeting, I'm just saying. To move this to a formal board, an evening meeting.
It's to approve.
Okay, then I guess I'm looking for a motion.
I'll move approval.
I have a comment, Cynthia.
Oh, I'm sorry, Larry, I didn't mean to forget you.
No problem. I would like to hear Mary respond to the comments the gentleman made about the letter,
Mary, do we have you?
at least in
Sure, I'll
general.
be happy to do that. I respectfully disagree with the speaker's comments. The board of directors has the discretion to adopt a payment plan there is no discrimination going on in rates. These public agencies will pay the CMF associated with their meter size. All this policy does is create a payment plan. It doesn't change any rates. It does not affect the proportionality of the rates. It simply allows a specific class of ratepayer, namely local public agencies, a payment plan given their budgetary constraints. I don't think there's anything that impedes, any legal issue that impedes the board's ability to move ahead and adopt the policy if you so desire.
Could I just add, there was discussion of this, at least at the hearing on May 28th. I mean, it didn't go into the specifics of there was discussion of this at the hearing on May 28th because I brought it up at the beginning of the hearing. So it didn't go into the specifics, but it was definitely a consideration before the board and before the protest meeting on May 28th. So with Mary's legal blessing as to its discriminatory impact, you know, I think it's a fair and equitable.
You don't mean that she's blessing a discriminatory impact. You mean her blessing that it is non-discriminatory. Just making sure we're being clear here.
You know, and the other thing is we do have programs for individuals who are having financial difficulties.
Of course.
And discounts for them. So.
And those have been upheld under 218 is my understanding. Right.
So I would second if that's still needed.
It is. It is. Thank you. So with that, we'll need the roll call.
Director Bragman.
Aye.
Director Gibson.
Aye.
Director Kohler.
Aye.
Director Russell.
Aye.
Thank you.
Great. We're now moving on to what was item 2, the monthly financial update.
We'll dive right in at 91.7% of the fiscal year. Our water revenue is at 91%. Overall operating revenues are at 91%. I would point out that our May of 18 fiscal year to May of 19 fiscal year, we're actually down $1.6 million. That is a combination of two things. May of 18 was a fairly high year as far as revenue goes. May of 19 is looking to be a slower year due to all the rains that we've had. But altogether, we're tracking along with our budget, and so we're doing okay that way. As far as expenditures go, personal services should end up at the end of the year fairly close to what was budgeted. Debt services will be dead on at the end of the year. Overall operating expenses right now are at about 88%, showing that we're trying to control expenditures as much as possible during the year. Total expenditures are $83.6 million so far for this year.
So just, Charlie, on the chart on page 9, which is budget to actual on the capital fund, when the CMF is implemented in a couple months,
Yes.
will that be broken out, or can you break that out similarly?
Yes, what we have, we have an explanation in the next item talking about precisely that.
Segregation of the fees.
Right, yes.
Okay.
Just a question, I'm not finding it now, but I noticed a number jumped out to 4.9% for grants. I think it was grant revenue. We're almost to all the other numbers are high, given where we are in the year, and this was 4.9%.
Right, grant revenue is always going to be somewhat in flux. When the budget was created, largely beginning at the end of 2016, there were some anticipated grants to either be applied for or had been applied for but not awarded. Those numbers reflect that for whatever reason the grant didn't materialize.
Didn't materialize, or it's a processing problem?
They could still, sometimes working with these grants, it takes a long time to get approval for them, and sometimes they're delayed. These in particular, I'm not sure about.
I think right now we did defer construction on winter habitat last summer, and it's gonna happen this summer. So it was expected to be last summer, in which case we would have had a grant disbursement, but it got delayed a year.
Okay, so that's a process problem.
Moving on to our ending reserves. We're looking at total reserves of $75.1 million, but that actually includes $21 million in the capital fund, which really isn't held in reserve. That's to be used for future projects. Our operating months reserve right now, we're projecting at 4.4 months. Debt service coverage at 1.5, and our total debt at $155.5 million. On our capital expenditure sheets, largely you're going to see a reflection of the original budget had $36.3 million. That was adjusted down to $20 million. If we look at our bottom line, we're at 19.7, which includes also the fire flow projects. We've continued to move forward with the pipeline replacement projects, and so that's very close to budget right now. The other projects leading into the new 2-year budget had a slowdown, mostly because there's some large projects such as the treatment plant upgrade that you've been briefed on, was going through a further review. That'll probably most likely be moving forward next year, so we'll see some of these expenditures move into next year. And that's our update for this month.
Thank you, Charlie. Do we have any board comments on this item? Larry, I want to be sure to catch you on the phone. Any board member, any comment on the update? You seem to be in pretty good shape. Okay, any public comment on this item? Seeing none, we are moving on to item 4, which is the CMF review and expenditure tracking.
This item is for discussion in the direction the board has for us. There's been discussion about, previously about how we're going to track the capital maintenance fees as they come in. Currently, we have a capital fund, and that fund houses proceeds from debt issuances and also, in comparison, smaller items such as if we sell a dump truck and we receive some proceeds from the sales of that, it goes into the capital fund.
So non-rate revenue, basically.
Non-rate revenue. And so what we're going to be looking at, what we've talked about, is segregating out that non-rate revenue. And so that, therefore, the capital fund will only house bond monies and CMF funds that we'll be able to track. Really, our plan is to spend down the bond proceeds first, which makes a lot of sense. It was borrowed for these specific projects, and as these projects are achieved, that money will go down, and as we exhaust the bond funds, then that fund will be solely CMF, and so in tracking until we issue another bond.
And when we do that, we'll go into the same fund.
Or we might create a separate bond fund at that time.
Okay.
We hadn't in the past, but probably moving forward, we'll create separate bond funds.
Okay.
So we just wanted to reassure the board that we will be tracking how the money that's coming in, and also be able to show that this money is being used for our capital expenditures as intended, and that there isn't shifting going around.
Okay. And then do you have a plan for how that will be conveyed to the public? Will there be some sort of quarterly report? Will you put something up on the website? What's your thinking about that?
Well, right now, the plan would be to incorporate it into our monthly updates.
Oh, that's perfect.
So that we'll be, certainly what we'll be doing is giving you updates on what revenue has been included or achieved through the CMF on a monthly basis, and then we'll also be reporting on the status of the overall capital fund, which will include the CMF and the bond funding.
Okay.
Charlie, I just want some reassurance that CMF funds will be accounted for separately, like the watershed fee funds. So when we get the annual budget, that will be segregated. I'm a little bit leery about it being not commingled, but included in the same capital fund accounting.
As the bond proceeds?
As everything else. So, there was a addendum to the rate proposal that called for it to be separated out. So I just want to hear whether that's actually going to happen.
Yes, we can make that happen.
And is that, that separation, what level? I mean, is it equivalent to like the fire flow accounting?
Well, right now, we have specific schedule of fire flow projects. Right, and so that tracking is explicit of fire flow funds go towards fire flow projects. We don't have an explicit CMF projects. We have our capital projects, we have our bond funding, and we have our CMF. So if you want us to break out explicitly the capital funding and the CMF, we can do that.
I think that makes sense. I mean, you're only talking about having the single CMF together with the bond proceeds, right? So it's only two.
Yes, that's the intent by this.
Yeah.
If you want us to break it out further, it does cause some extra work on behalf of all the projects and the accounting of that.
I didn't hear you say that. You just want to see, like, you want to see the CMF funds separate from the bond proceeds.
Correct.
Yeah.
I think it should be called out and accounted for separately, which was my understanding
Yeah.
of what we agreed to when we passed the rate measure.
Right, mine as
Right,
well.
and we can make that happen, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so, and I think that responds to Mr. McNeil's objections too. So, you know, it's good as far as our ability to track, and it also responds to that legal objection for whatever worth that objection really has.
The fire flow, as I understand what you said about fire flow has not only an income associated with, but a specific project associated with it.
Right.
Our capital maintenance program will have the funds set up, but a project may be,
Down the road.
well, it may also be financed by a combination of those funds plus other capital funds or something.
Yes.
Is that theoretically so?
Yes, that's theoretically so. However, we can explicitly show
Okay.
bond funding versus CMF funding. Will be considerable additional steps to
Right.
what the staff will have to do to be able to do that.
So we can have an accounting for this as distinct as the fire flow accounting.
We can do that. It
Yeah.
just requires a lot. I just want to impress on the board.
I don't know what I'm asking.
Right, I think
There's a lot of
they're
extra
two different
steps to
things.
do
There's
that.
the accounting for the money that comes in, and then there's
Right.
the accounting for it as it goes out. And I think what we really talked about through the entire rate process was keeping track of what is coming in. And I think the way that you've got it set up, I mean, I think the issue of where it, how it is spent, obviously we need to keep track of that as well, but that is down the road, is what I'm hearing. Initially, we're going to continue to spend down for our capital projects, the bond funds. So we're really gonna be seeing the CMF as just kind of coming in for, some relatively brief period of time. So we've got time to figure out how to do the accounting for where exactly those individual dollars are going.
Maybe. Yeah, I mean, it's gonna depend how the budget goes, because some of the bond projects may not go out next year, so CMF could be
Right.
used. So I think we need income and outflows.
I think we can do it. I think staff will sit down, maybe we'll just, all the near-term projects would be bond funded, and we utilize that, and we're done with the bond funds, and then we have one account that would just be CMF, as you're asking, that would be implementation of the capital program.
I don't think
And
it's
certainly,
We'll sit down and figure
certainly
that out.
like in the annual budget, so that you're not like doing ticky-tacky little accounting for the whole year, but when we get a budget, it should be broken out, I think. So we can go back and say, this is what we did, this is what we brought in, this is what we did.
We should be able to do that.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Okay, Larry, go ahead.
Would it be more efficient to simply use the CMF to pay the bond funding for the year? In other words, all of the bond funding is restricted by law to be used on capital improvement. So if we just took the money from CMF that comes in that equals the bond payment, make the bond payment from that money, then it's clear that that money has been used for capital improvement.
You're saying basically use the CMF to pay the debt service, is what you're saying?
Yeah, the CMF is more than the debt service,
Yeah.
but it's like $5 million more, but that would take away $10 million of it that's clearly been spent on capital improvement.
I kind of disagree with that.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think
Why?
that. I just, I mean, the problem I have with it is it's a little bit of a switch, and, you know, it gets me a little bit nervous about doing that. I mean, I think the expectation was, we're gonna bring in this money, and then we're gonna use it for explicit
Capital
capital
needs.
fund
Yeah.
needs,
But that's
including
exactly
watershed.
what we're doing if we pay the bond fund.
Well, that's not
That's-
exactly what we're doing.
Well,
That's
Well,
interest.
why don't we think about it and we can, you know, discuss it at a later date.
That's fine.
One
Yes.
thing I propose is, we will be coming forward to you with this information, and so we'll explicitly show you in the packet where it is once we start receiving it, and we can make adjustments at that time if it's not to the board's liking or explicit enough. So that way, we're not locked into anything right now. We know we can make changes to improve the reporting and the transparency.
Okay,
Yeah, and I think
that
that's
sounds
the
good.
critical thing. I am hearing a lot of board consensus around that. It's gonna be very, very important to all of us, that we have a lot of transparency around exactly what's coming in, what it's going to. And, I agree with both Larrys that this is, the conversation that we just had about how we use it, whether and how to use it for debt service. I think we should defer that. I will say in my experience, and I don't know, Charlie or you or perhaps Ben have a view on this, that debt service is almost always paid for out of rates. It would be a little unusual to be paying debt service out of additional capital funds.
Well, the CMF is set up to allow us to do that, and
Okay.
and that is what allows us to count it towards our debt service coverage.
I see.
However, what I received from the board during this whole process was the intent to use it towards projects.
Right, capital projects.
And only as a really serious backstop to
Yes.
debt service.
Okay, great.
And
So it sounds like we're all pretty much on the same page. Okay. Any further public comment on this item? I see none. Any further board comment on this item? This was just a discussion and direction to staff. Do you feel you have that?
Yes, I do.
Then I believe we are adjourned. Thanks, everybody.